So I wanted to get into the Christmas spirit, so decided to watch a classic film all about burglars being maimed by an 8-year-old boy. Home Alone. As I was watching, I realised that the two villains, Harry and Marv, the Wet Bandits, actually drive a 1986 Dodge Ram van, and I decided that this would be a really good festive build. The first question would be which kit to use to recreate the OK plumbing and heating van that they use as a disguise, and I settled on this 1982 Dodge van from MPC in 1/25th scale. Let's see how I get on. So the general shape of the van hadn't changed too much from the 70s, but there were a few things I needed to remove. Firstly, some of the mould seams, principally around the corners of the vehicle, along the edge of the bonnet, things like that. There was a little bit of flash, what with this being an old kit, but it wasn't too bad, all things considered. As well as that, the badging on the bonnet, the rear and the doors had all changed since the 1986 version came out, so I made sure to sand all of those flat as well. Here I am sanding away the Dodge markings on the bonnet. I'll replace that later on with some decals. The other thing was the van in the film has a sliding door, whereas this has barn doors on the side. I figure that this is a really minor difference, and I'm not going to worry too much about things like this. After priming it using Kaleido light grey primer, I had a look at what colour it was. It's this kind of light blue metallic. Now I didn't really have this, so I decided to mix a couple of Kaleido colours, the aluminium with their baby blue from the Auto Colours range, and tried to match it as close as possible. It's not exact, but I think it's alright. I used the paints from this fantastic Kaleido ProMaster Series Auto Colours kit, which comes in this excellent carry case here. As you can see, this has got these little tester pieces that you can spray. It's also got a full range of primers, including white, grey and black. Black I used for many of the metallic parts in this. Varnishes, cleaners and thinners, as well as the full range of auto colour paints. Here's the baby blue that I used, and their metallics, including things like copper, stainless steel, titanium, things like that. A fantastic addition, and you can get 10% off your order using the code BUILDING010. Thanks a lot. So after it was primed in white, I used that mixture of baby blue and aluminium. Through my Gaahleri swallowtail airbrush, did about 5 coats of this, tried to get it as even as possible. I wasn't too worried about this being a fantastic finish because it's a pretty shabby looking van. So just want it to get as smooth as possible. I'm not going to be wet sanding or polishing this, although you can do that with Kaleido paints. Once the paint had cured, I used the OK plumbing and heating decals that I'd printed off myself. You can see a tutorial how to do that above if you're interested. This is all printed on transparent paper, which works quite well over light colours like whites, greys, pale blues, yellows, things like that. I'm also using Mr. Mark Setter to help this adhere as best as possible. The logos are actually slightly different on each side of the car, with saying residential work is our speciality on one side and the other side bragging about being the flood control experts. So if you're going to do this as well, make sure to look at the car really carefully. The rear has a slightly smaller logo and a stepladder, which I'll be trying to recreate later on. I've also incorporated the Dodge Ram logo underneath this. This is the side with your flood control experts on it. As this also went around one of the door handles on this side, I cut these ones out separately so that I could not put the decal directly over the door handle. Making sure it's nice and flat, don't want any air pockets underneath. And then just going over some of the panel lines with a very sharp craft blade. There's that little wood mark underneath. And the phone number is in a slightly different position on each side of the van, so make sure you check that carefully. Now for the logos, I put the decals onto thin pieces of styrene sheet and then coloured them black around the edge to make them look like they were 3D pieces. These were then superglued on very carefully using rocket superglue, which has become my go-to as it doesn't damage the paint. Did the same on both sides and also a small Dodge logo on the bonnet. Now whilst this doesn't have an opening bonnet, it does have a detailed engine, or hood I should say for the American viewers out there. You can't open it, but there it is anyway. So this is a Dodge V8. I'm not sure whether the Wet Bandits would have had such a big engine, but I don't know. Anyone who knows anything about Dodge trucks might be able to tell me a little bit about that. This is mainly going to be the one colour, so it's good to assemble as much as possible before painting it. And there it is after it's been painted in stainless steel. I used Kaleido black primer for this, which really helped the metallic colours pop. There's then a few chrome parts, which again I've used some of that super glue to attach. I think often these engines were blue, but I decided you're not going to see this, so I'm just going to do it mainly in stainless steel. Obviously the belts at the front are in matte black, and then you got that fan at the front. And there we are, the engine's finished. Should put that down until I need it later. Now the chassis is made up of a few parts, but most of it is one piece, the kind of ladder frame. Make sure to assemble the rear axle here carefully, as the metal rod for the wheels will need to go through that. So I'm using Tamiya Extra Thin to join most of these parts together before priming and then painting. Parts of the exhaust system varies depending on whether you're doing a custom or a stock version, so refer to the instructions carefully. Now for the ladder on the back, firstly I'm using this styrene rod which has a thin metal rod on the inside. It's quite good because it's quite stiff, so what I've done is I've used a vise to actually bend this into these shape with right angles, and then I'm using very sharp pliers to cut this apart. Just sand down those edges to make sure they're smooth. As they've got a metal rod on the inside, they can be quite sharp. Now for the rungs of the ladder, I'm using a 0.5mm styrene sheet, which I'm then sanding little kind of circular inlets using a rounded file. I'm laying them up next to each other to try and get all of the gaps in the same place. And then as it's all styrene, I can use polycement to attach these together. Using the lines on the craft mat here to make sure they're all in the same position. This was a very fiddly process, and you can just buy styrene ladders if this is too much bother, but I wanted to try and use my skills as much as possible. Now once this was all assembled and I was made sure that it had dried, I primed it in black, then painted it in black, and then went over the sides of the ladder in steel paint here from Revell. Really happy with how this looks. And there you are, you can see how it will look. I need to drill some holes at the bottom here so that it's nice and secure. And again, it's good to use like a rounded file to make sure that those gaps are the right shape. Now the stock wheels were too racy, so I found these Steelies, which were left over from a Revell Corvette C2 kit, put them in some bleach to strip off the chrome, and then they were actually exactly the right size. So that was very fortunate. They don't match exactly the ones on the van in the film, but I don't think it matters too much. Now the tyres were very stiff, so I put them into some freshly boiled water and then dried them off, basically just to make the rubber a little bit more pliable. They've got Goodyear markings on them, but they're the same on both sides, so just put them on the best way that fits. Then attach them to the metal axles. And slide them into the chassis, which has now been painted in stainless steel. When doing the one on the other side, push it against the table, as that will give you the resistance you need. There we are. They spin in case you want your model to roll. And there we are. Then you've got the drive shaft. And the engine pins into that and then into the chassis underneath. I ended up using super glue for this as it just didn't feel very secure with just poly cement. You've got two choices for the exhaust. I'm using the stock version. And then you've got the little radiator which goes in front of that. Now all the interior for this version is black. I've done this in kind of semi-gloss black. I also added some little clock faces for the instrument display. These were just spares I had lying around. Don't match exactly, but they're okay. And then I picked out some buttons and latches, things like that, with this silver Posca paint pen. Now here's the interior, also painted in black. Not added any of the optional extras that come with the kit, including curtains, tables, TVs, things like that. Although maybe I should have put a TV in, considering that they were robbing from people's houses. The seats are very basic, made up of 3 parts: the fronts, the backs, and the support underneath. Just like the other interior parts, I assembled them first. The joins were a little bit big, so I tried to use a little bit of filler in places. They were painted black as well, and then glued into place. There we have it. It was clear coated using Kaleido gloss varnish. And then once that had cured, I went over some of the parts like the rubber trim around the front windscreen, just using some Revell semi-gloss black for this one. I also used some Tamiya panel liner to pick out the vents on the bonnet and the windscreen wipers in matte black. I initially went over all of the door handles in black and then used this aluminium Kaleido paint pen here to do the chrome parts like the window trim here, door handles, things like that. I also did the inside of the tail lights. Using black first I find really helps the metallic paints pop. Now, just like the wheels, the radiator had been put into bleach to remove the chrome. I then went over it in grey primer for the bumper, then masked that off, did black, then masked off the radiator and did the outside in aluminium. And the thin bars across the middle, I went over those with the aluminium paint pen. Found that this was much easier than masking all these sections off individually. The headlights, as I said, just like the radiator, aren't exactly right. You can go online and find people who 3D print a replacement radiator for this, but they're all based in North America, and unfortunately the postage costs were a little bit too much for me. I did the custom number plate. Also went over the indicators with some clear orange. In between the grille and the front bumper, there's this thin piece here which needs to be in body colour. The rear bumper had also been stripped of chrome and painted in grey primer, and I added the number plate. And then you got two choices for the windscreens. Obviously, as this is stock, I'm going with the non-tinted one here. I used a small amount of that Rocket foam safe super glue at the top to secure this into place. And then make sure that you get the rear window around the right way. There's like a sort of slight curve to it, so the curve needs to be on the outside. I did think about using the tinted ones here because you can't really see inside the van, but whatever, it's up to you. Now Marv steals snow globes and sticks them to the dashboard in their car, so I decided to recreate these. These are little sort of clear parts left over from a Aoshima Back to the Future DeLorean kit, which look a bit like snow globes, so I coloured the bottom of them black and then glued them to the dashboard like so. Unfortunately, one of them would later fall off, but still, I think it's a nice little touch. Just checking for fitment here, making sure that I'm all happy with it. Also making sure that you can't see any bare styrene. And so I slid the interior into the van and then clipped the chassis around the bottom like so, making sure that it was in the right position. I didn't like the moulded headlights, so I found some spare rectangular headlights and just glued those into place. They stick out a little bit, but they look far more realistic than the stock ones in the kit, in my opinion. Let me know what you think anyway. And that slides into place like so. Not perfect, but I think it looks okay. Obviously, if you want an exact replica, do seek out those 3D printed ones online. Used a bit of red Sharpie to pick out the markers on the back here, and also coloured the fuel cap in black. The one on the 86 version is actually a square fuel cap, so it's different to this, but you know, as I say, it's not 100% accurate. I filled in the taillight recesses with some silver, and here I am using a small amount of glue to attach the red rear lights. I also used a bit of silver paint pen to do the reversing lights onto those. There is a marked sort of outline for where that needs to go. Here I'm using some super glue to add the stairs to the back. Pretty happy with how this looks. There we are. Now for the roof rack, I used this lattice rod here, as it has that kind of triangular pattern along the sides. It's not exactly like this, but I think this looks okay. It's almost exactly the right length actually. You just compare this. I'm just going to give it a little trim at the front and the back. Sand this down as well, as it's got some mould seams on it. Then what I did was I cut some thin strips of styrene and glued it together in a rectangular pattern, like so. Added some strength to the middle by adding a couple of extra pieces. And then this was all primed in black and then painted in stainless steel. Just trim along the edge here. Now the bottom of it actually has this mesh. This is a kind of rat-proof mesh that I found at a kind of DIY shop. I cut it out and then super glued it into the right position. Be very careful when doing this. as it can be very sharp, and also wear sort of gloves and eye protection when cutting it. I used some paint clips to hold this into place while it was securing. Now the wing mirrors, the ones in the kit, weren't exactly right. I should really have drilled these holes earlier, but at least I'm doing it now. Found I had some leftovers from a Land Rover kit I did a few years ago, which looked a bit more like the ones on the actual car. Open up those holes. And then these I covered in some aluminium tape to make them look like chrome. And then just glued them into place, like so. Now is the time to weather it, so one thing I needed to do was to mask off the windscreen in a kind of wiper pattern to make it look dirty. Then I cut that out, reattached it, and then I used some Tamiya Weathering Master sets, sand, mud, things like that, on places like the windscreen, along the radiator, along the sides of the car, all things like that, just to make it look a little bit like it had been driven around in a dirty winter. Looks alright, but I decided to add some, just some small scratches to the window, make it look like they'd left some smears with the wipers. I test fitted the roof rack before finally gluing it into place. And then it was time to add some things to the top. Glued together these styrene tubes. You could use straws maybe. Also used a small piece of elastic to attach them together. These are actually coffee stirrers, which I sort of clipped together to make planks. And this is the lid from a small spray bottle, painted black to make it look like a bucket. I then used some leftover of my wife's hair ties in orange to create the sort of bungee cord that clips them all onto the roof rack. And after that, I was pretty much finished. Here are some final shots. Let me know what you think down below. So there we have it. Let me know what you think down below, and if you'd have a go at building something like this. Do you have a favourite Christmas film that you make sure without fail to watch every single year? For me, it's A Muppet Christmas Carol, although there's no cars in that one, so I wasn't going to be able to base a build upon that film. Here's what I think of this kit. I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out. As I say before, let me know what you think down below. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I'll see you in 2026. Thanks a lot.